Welcome.
Terrific. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having us here, and we're really proud to be with you today as we roll out our set of policies that we think positions us to offer the most comprehensive look at what the presidency can do to empower women politically, socially, and economically. And I'm mindful of the work that the Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence is doing here and tied into a broader movement around the country to confront domestic and sexual violence. I admire that work. It's made a big difference and deserves allies of the strongest character in the White House. So thanks for what you do. A basic principle of government, of politics, is that every American deserves to live in safety. And yet we know that right now 1 in 4 women, 1 in 9 men experience domestic violence in the course of their lifetime. And the numbers are much higher for women of color, for transgender Americans, and for low-income women, who are often also the most vulnerable and feel that they get the least support from the community or from law enforcement when they need it most. And we have to change that. Survivors stepping forward to share their stories, which has often been an act of extraordinary courage, has also, I think, changed what's possible in this country. And it ought to change what's possible in what we believe can be achieved in politics, in policy, and in our space. And I'm proud to stand behind and alongside women who have really pioneered the changes that need to happen and offer a plan that, among many other things, addresses these issues. We know that, for example, we need access to safe housing. We need to make sure that our gun policy is set up to disarm domestic abusers. When we have the so-called boyfriend loophole, for example, in the ability to access guns and get around background checks right now. We know that criminalizing non-consensual pornography, or so-called revenge porn at the federal level, can help us advance where we know that so much of abuse is moving into the digital space and needs to be confronted as we move ahead there. We've got to act to reauthorize and strongly enforce the Violence Against Women's Act and make sure that the kind of political delays that we're experiencing can't happen again by ensuring an automatic timetable for reauthorization. We know that we need to better train first responders, law enforcement, members of the judiciary, so that their work is trauma-informed. We need not just trauma-informed medical care, but frankly, trauma-informed first response and a trauma-informed criminal justice system. And speaking of criminal justice, we know from experience, certainly in our part of the country, why it is imperative with federal support to end the backlog of untested rape kits that represents an embarrassing and costly delay in the need for justice in this country. So there's one after another policy issue that needs attention, but I think beneath all of it is the issue of culture. And that's why I am proposing that we ensure that everyone in schools, for example, is educated in things like bystander intervention. And we need to confront that the problem of domestic and sexual violence, while so much of the leadership and work on dealing with it is being led by women, this is largely a problem of men and boys. And the way that education works and the messages that are received by young men and boys is as important as anything that we can do on the back end, where hopefully there is less and less occasion for the kind of work that you all do so well here to go on, because the number of cases that reach that point is reduced. So I want to again applaud you on the work that's going on here and look forward to the conversation about what's at stake and what we can do.
Wonderful. Well, I certainly appreciate how you've identified that so many of these issues are at intersections with each other, that they overlap in so many ways. And I think our biggest challenge in planning for today was we'd love to talk to you about all of them, but we had to narrow it down a little bit in terms of some of the things that we're working on that we feel like are especially cutting edge. So with that, we'd like to turn to some of our programming around economic justice and housing. So I'm going to start with Marie, our program director. So Marie works on a daily basis with our programs around the state, and in that capacity, hears about both the struggles and challenges, but also some of the successes that survivors experience. So I'm hoping, Marie, that you can talk about some of the challenges, specifically here in New Hampshire, around survivors finding safe and sustainable housing.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lyn, and thank you, Mayor Pete. So though it may really not be known outside of New Hampshire widely, is that New Hampshire is really facing and struggling with quite the housing crisis. And that is both with affordable housing as well as vacancy rates. So in some of our communities, vacancy is at 0.4%. And if we look at communities like the community we're here in Concord, the median rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is $12.50 a month. Based upon research in the state from New Hampshire Housing, that indicates about, for someone to have, a stable livelihood and support that they need to run a household with that type of rental cost, they need $52,000 a year as an annual salary to maintain that living, which, as we know from working with the survivors that we serve, that's not their experience, right? And so when we're looking and we're talking about affordable housing, we have to pair that with what's the availability and also what is the cost. So therefore, the coalition has made a really concerted effort to look at a wide array of housing options to support survivors. We honor and acknowledge that there's absolutely always a need for emergency shelter, and our 13-member programs also provide for that. But we also look at, one of my colleagues has launched a rental assistance program through HUD. So looking at that, but then also looking at a domestic violence housing first program to really address some of the root causes of housing and homelessness, and really looking at housing support services provided directly by advocates, as well as flexible rental assistance that really allows for and addresses preventing eviction before it happens. So we know for many survivors that while the common thread is that they leave and they need new housing, for many survivors, they may have been successful in having the perpetrator removed from the situation, and they're in a safe place. But their financial abuse is so extraordinary that they need some tangible supports and assistance to do that. And that's what we do through our Domestic Violence Housing First program. And that's a partnership that is funded from VOCA funding, so Victims of Crime Act funding, as well as private partnerships. But it really doesn't end there. We really need to look on a community level, and I think your plan and your policy so indicates and underlies the value of the societal norms we have in terms of pushing to have all of us buy in to keeping people safe and stable. And so we even go to the end of, we've developed a partnership with the largest electric utility company in the state, acknowledging that while it might be great that someone's housed, if they're having utility assistance challenges, that's also a huge problem for their safety for themselves and for their children. So we've really looked to expand and move outside of the box at different opportunities that will help survivors in the long term. So we're really grateful for policies that indicate that this isn't just something that is great to do, but it's something that should be done and should be the norm for everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marie. As Marie indicated, connecting to safe and stable housing and the availability of safe and stable housing is ensuring that survivors have both the resources but also the skills to be able to live on their own after leaving an abusive relationship. And so I'm hoping that Natalie can talk a little bit about financial literacy services that we've been engaged in and how those services empower survivors and help them overcome the significant barriers that they face after financial abuse when it comes to accessing safe and secure housing.
Yeah, sure. So we've known for a while that finances pose a significant barrier to folks being able to leave an unsafe situation. But as the research from the national network started to come out, that as much as 98% of folks experiencing domestic violence were also experiencing financial abuse, we were thinking we really have to approach this in a more intentional and thoughtful way. So we have an amazing existing program here called the AmeriCorps Victim Assistance Program, which I have the honor of overseeing, where we place national service members throughout the state of New Hampshire at crisis centers, prosecutor's office, and police departments, all providing direct service to survivors and their families. And so it was really the vision of Marie that we started to really intentionally integrate economic empowerment training to those members so they can provide services. And they provide a wide range of services based on where survivors are at and what they're needing. So it could be help with financial safety planning, budgeting, learning about credit, applying for student loans, how to avoid predatory lending practices, And our members, they do both one-on-one work, but also financial workshops in the community. So, and this is really to meet survivors where they're at. So this could take place at a crisis center. Our members have collaborated with community financial institutions to put on workshops. And we've also gone into the jails and put on groups for incarcerated survivors, so that when they get out, they have some of those skills necessary to access safety and stability. And so we've also partnered with the Bank of New Hampshire to put on a match savings program here at the Coalition, so that encourages saving habits, and we're able to match what a survivor saves. And so that's been really awesome.
Great.
As well as helping survivors access a microloan program to improve their credit score. So
Wonderful.
those are some of the really tangible things that we've been able to help survivors apply for.
Terrific.
Yeah, and then, so we have wonderful crisis center-based members, but we also have members placed, like I mentioned, at prosecutor's office and police departments. So those members are helping survivors access victims' compensation, learning about restitution. So for instance, accessing counseling services because of the trauma they've experienced and using restitution funds to pay for those. So really getting creative for what economic empowerment services, what that umbrella looks like. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the impact of our program. So last program year, our members served 1,500 survivors. Provided almost 2,000 financial literacy services and almost 800 housing services. So they're wonderful, and their impact is huge. And I just wanted to share a brief survivor story. One of our members was serving last year, and she was looking to get into her own apartment, so we were able to enroll her in the match savings program to help save for the security deposit. She also participated in the microloan program and was able to increase her credit score a little bit for her rental application. And she said, "I cannot thank my advocate enough. I didn't think that I could ever learn how to save money for myself, but my advocate worked hard to help me learn. This was an opportunity for me to believe in myself, and I now have more of the necessary information and confidence to lead an independent life."
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great impact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I think what these examples really illustrate is that this work is done on so many levels. I think often there's a perception that the work that we do is about an immediate crisis response or is about shelter, and it really happens on so many levels, and particularly the aspect of standing shoulder to shoulder with survivors as they rebuild their lives and we partner with them. It's all of these partnerships that are so very important. So, which is a great segue to many partnerships that we have in one of our wonderful community supporters. So Senator Shannon Chandley also serves on our board of directors, and you give so generously of your time supporting both the Coalition and the Crisis Center in your local community. So we'd love to hear from you about why you think it's important for members in the community and other organizations in the community to support this work.
Well, thank you, Lynn. Thank you for that question, and thank you, Mayor, for being here. Everyone has a role to play in supporting the work to help victims. Each of us can do something, whether that means writing letters to the editor, volunteering time at a crisis center, or supporting community fundraisers. I know that there are all kinds of fundraisers, from sort of gala events to 5Ks. There are all kinds of ways that everyone in the community can participate. I am particularly committed to the work of prevention. I think that's essential because in so many cases, prevention is an investment. Any dollars spent, whether it's by the Coalition, the PMCs, but most importantly, by our local governments, our state government, and our federal government, any prevention dollars are an investment. Will not only save lives and save the pain and suffering that occurs after abuse, but we will save dollars in the future. If we can invest now in prevention, we don't have to have people who are interacting with the criminal justice system. We would save dollars in terms of incarceration, and certainly we would save on medical services and the kinds of work, folks are talking about, trying to get people's lives rebuilt. So prevention is especially important for all of us. And I think we also have to think about these funding streams because it all can't come from the local community if that local community doesn't have the resources. So we need to think about how we use our money at the federal level, state level, local level, to be making sure that everyone in New Hampshire is safe. I think, volunteerism will always be essential. Volunteers are essential to the work we do at every level, but there is a role for local, state, and federal government to play. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think one of the things that all of these comments really highlight, and you kind of alluded to it, is we have the unique role as an organization and as a movement of hoping to work ourselves out of a job someday. We'd really love to not need to do this work, to move upstream and to effectively engage with partners around prevention. I couldn't agree more with your comments about systems-wide trauma-informed responses are so critical because survivors interact with systems across their lifespan, and whether it's an educational institution, whether it's, I know you speak so profoundly about the impact of teachers in your lives, we are really engaged now in important conversations about how schools respond around sexual violence, but we need every institution, law enforcement, medical providers, everyone to respond appropriately. When a survivor comes forward, the most important thing anyone can do is say, I believe you, and I'm sorry this happened to you. So we continue to share that message with everyone who's interacting with survivors. And I just want to take a moment and thank everyone who came today, many of our wonderful volunteers, many survivors who are here in the room who came to be part of this conversation, and would love to just turn it back to you if you have any closing comments.
Terrific. Well, again, I want to thank you for bringing us together. And as you said, what's so striking, I think, is the way all these different pieces interact. So, Senator, when you're focusing on prevention, you're thinking about how to make sure it never even gets to the stage where we're talking about how to accommodate the aftermath of a situation, and recognizing that can't be separated from access to housing that is safe and affordable and stable, and understanding that financial empowerment is such an important part of this. I really am struck by the solution orientation here, because I think in politics we've become very proficient in describing the problem.
Right.
And you can get a lot of points just for doing a good job of describing the problem. But it turns out when you look to introduce solutions, you've got to think about all the different ways that they interact. And it's part of what we're trying to achieve with our plan as well, that it really recognizes the relationship of economic empowerment, social and cultural empowerment, and ultimately political power, which is why it is also so important that we have balance and equity in positions of influence.
Excited about that.
So looking forward to that when we have that gender-balanced 50+% women cabinet, for example. One of many examples of how I think we can really change the whole conversation. And it is a strange thing to say, but I too hope that you will no longer have a job in this field.
Find something else to do, I'm sure.
And that's a goal we can all work toward together. So thanks for your leadership,
so much.
and thanks for the opportunity to
Thank you
discuss
so
this
much.
together. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank
Thank
you so much. Appreciate it.